Yes, hi.
Hi. I am a timer, like to be on time, right? So we can respect each other's time. So we'll start here in 1 minute, and we'll go by the order that's in the program. And it looks like everyone is here. So what I would like to do is to give everyone maybe about 12 minutes, uh, or maybe even 10, so that we can get more full in case there are any questions in the chat. Does that sound fair? It's good?
Sounds great, thank you.
Awesome.
Sounds good to me.
Awesome. So we'll let a few more people come. Well, it's 4:15, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. I am super excited for this panel, Understanding Black Political Engagement. We will start with the first paper that is on the program, and that is with Ashley Daniels. So Ashley, you should be able to share your screen and go ahead and get started.
Okay, let me go ahead and do that. Okay. Well, excuse me. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We are so happy to be here, me and my team. I am Ashley Daniels. I serve as the 2021-2022 Leading Edge Fellow for Black Girls Vote, and I am presenting this work with my co-authors, Stephanie Demore and Sarah Hayes, and we are going to talk about a project that we are working on called Party at the Mailbox. Just a little bit about it. It's a really cool project, and we hope to get some good feedback from you all. So the motivation from this project came from a organization called Black Girls Vote. So it's a beautiful brainchild of this group. Black Girls Vote is a nonpartisan organization that really works and focuses on mobilizing Black voters, specifically around the ages of 18 to 25. In 2020, they had an innovative project when they were thinking about voting and how COVID-19 could be affecting people going to the polls. So they came up with this idea called Party at the Mailbox, which is a really unique project in that they mobilize voters by giving them educational boxes. So they give them educational boxes. It's filled with all kinds of prizes and goodies and all those kind of things. But in the midst of that, that project is really centered on making voting a celebratory event. So it was founded by Nikidra Robinson of Black Girls Vote, and she also did it in partnership with Baltimore Votes and numerous other organizations. So essentially what the Party of the Mailbox initiative is, again, so the organization Black Girls Vote, along with 60 community organization partners, send out these informational kits. And what makes these informational kits very unique is that they have all kinds of things in them that are from the local city. So if starting with Baltimore, there is a cookie factory named Burger Cookies, which is really unique to that community. And it's also a family-oriented box in that within the box, you have cookies and prizes, but then you also have a coloring book as well. So that way voting is more of like a family experience, and it can be a family discussion. Participants are recruited via Facebook, via Google form, where they can sign up for a chance to get the box. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the methodology portion. And also Party at the Mailbox is very oriented in working with local community organizations. So Black Girls Vote, in every city that they've been in, they've made it a point to actually connect with local community members to partner with what they're doing. And again, really centering and really situating this event and making it a celebratory nature. Black Girls Vote also has reached out to local community outlets. So they've used different kinds of media, particularly Black media in various Black neighborhoods. So for example, in Baltimore, you have the Baltimore Afro, which is the longest running newspaper that's centered in the African American community. And then on election night, Party at the Mailbox really created a online Facebook party. So it was inviting local DJs from places like 92Q. It was inviting, you know, local talent to really make it a celebratory event. Again, make it really festive in this idea of voting. So our role with Black Girls Vote and Party at the Mailbox is that we serve as the program evaluators. So we test to see how effective this project actually is. So when we're thinking about research questions, we question how can local community organizations increase Black voter turnout. We also ask, how does Party at the Mailbox initiative impact the voting behavior of low propensity communities? And how do Black voters feel about voting as a celebratory experience? So if we want to situate this particular project in academic literature, once we think about Party at the Mailbox, it's really situated in various types of literature across various disciplines, essentially. So Party at the Mailbox, in essence, it draws inspiration from previous celebratory get out the vote initiatives like Party at the Polls or Souls at the Polls. And it also draws parallels from election festivals. So if you go into like the history part of that, that's kind of where Party at the Mailbox shapes this idea, and it shapes its perspective on how it should be implemented. So in political science, if you look at the use of Black social spaces as catalysts for Black political thought and behavior, you kind of get into where Haynes Walton and Melissa Harris Lacewell talk about the significance of that. You also get into this idea of Black Americans perceiving voting as a duty than a choice, particularly for the betterment of Black Americans, which automatically that's, you know, Dawson and Linked Fate, and also kind of getting into White and Layard's work in 2020. But now going over to considering Black women's studies, Black Girls Vote seems to have is part of the historic lineage of Black women's organizations that are mobilizing their communities to become politically involved. And you see that in the work of Pearl Ford Dow, you see that in the work of Paula Giddings, you see that in Patricia Hill Collins, and you also see that in Wendy Smoot's work. So how we actually explain or come up with this idea of what Black Girls Vote is doing, we like to coin the phrase that what they're doing is called a voter community celebration model. And essentially what this model is doing is that it's really situating the act of voting, not just in a celebratory sense, but also in a community sense at the very same time. So we assert that the voter community celebration model is a get out the vote engagement method that asserts that the individual is acknowledged and intentionally celebrated as an active participant of American democracy as a voter. And that's regardless of party affiliation. So that's really important. We also assert that voting is viewed as a fun and educational family activity, and that voting is openly celebrated as an act of public service among the voters' entire local residential community. And to talk about the methods, I will take that over to Steph.
Okay, hi everyone. Our evaluation was multi-part. Once people signed up through a Google form, half of those folks received a box, which is our treatment, and half didn't, our control. And we sent everyone who signed up a survey and selected people randomly to participate in focus groups and in one-on-one interviews. Okay, next slide. So for the Baltimore pilot survey, should be next, yeah. We found that the boxes increased identification with the city. So people were more likely to say that they felt like Baltimoreans once they received the box compared to those who who got nothing in the control. And here we show the breakdown of who all sort of took the survey, but when we limited our results to the subset of those who identified as Black, our results did strengthen slightly. It's important to note that we only invited hosts to take the survey, and hosts are just the people who signed that Google form, who requested the box. People who lived with them, we call guests of the party. We imagine that signing up to have a voting party at your home means that you're probably already pretty engaged, but this was our pilot project, so we were able to use what we learned here to refine our future surveys and sort of methodology overall. but strengthening identification here as Baltimoreans. And we saw an increase in at least reported voter turnout at this point, and that was all really sort of encouraging for us. Okay, next slide. The interviews and focus groups didn't disappoint at all. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Sarah before I get back to the RCT so she can explain some of those findings.
Thank you, Steph. I appreciate it. Hey, everyone. So I'll be going over the qualitative component of Party at the Mailbox. So for our qualitative analysis, we decided to conduct individual interviews with voters as well as group focus groups as well. For the qualitative research component of Party at the Mailbox, we conducted open-ended, semi-structured interviews that lasted on Zoom for about 60 to 90 minutes. These interviews were conducted in each city by a group of trained academic researchers who are engaged and experts in qualitative interviewing. For example, since she is on the panel right now, we had the brilliant Dr. Slaughter do focus group interviews in Detroit, I believe, and just speaks to the testament of having just really great and awesome people who helped us bring this project together. Next slide, please. And for this, what we were attempting to do from the interviews and focus groups, we were interested in uncovering how voters, and in particular Black women, felt about their interactions with the Party at the Mailbox programming. And we were also interested in discovering their attitudes and opinions regarding voting, but also just being civically engaged at large. Next slide, please, Ashley. And another important aspect of our focus groups and interviews was just uncovering how voters just broadly engaged in civic participation throughout the height of the pandemic. One crucial aspect of our analysis was trying to see how Black communities engage in civic engagement and voter turnout during the pandemic, where groups were not allowed to physically be together, but see how Party at the Mailbox essentially worked and the programming worked virtually. And from here, I will pass it back over to Steph.
Awesome. So as promised, here are the RCT results. We found additional support in the pilot here for what we were hearing in those interviews and in the survey that I talked about. The boxes increased guest turnout by about 2.7 percentage points when we matched all of those folks to their voter file records. And when we look at the effect on low propensity voters, whether or not they were a guest, we see that there's a significant effect of 12.4 percentage points, which is pretty awesome. These results, we were really excited again. You can go to the next slide, sorry, Ashley. And so we did this again in Baltimore, and then we did expand to Detroit and Philly for the 2020 general, and then Atlanta for the runoff. For the purposes of time, I'm just going to focus on Baltimore for today. And I can tell you those results were a little bit different, but yeah, we're gonna stick to Baltimore. All right, so the follow-up included about 2,200 individuals. We got far fewer in this survey, and even fewer when compared to the pilot, unfortunately. So we weren't able to get much from the survey results, but we definitely saw a lot from the actual field experiment. So next slide. We were able to increase voter turnout by 5.3 percentage points, specifically among low propensity folks, which is another sizable effect. So overall, we know that this can be effective. Party at the Mailbox can be effective in producing shifts in things like political efficacy, identity, and encouragement, and then in some cases turnout, like in both of these Baltimore cases. But I'll throw it back to Sarah really quickly to finish up our slides.
Thanks, Steph. And just really quickly, again, because we're running out of time, we conducted a thematic content analysis of all of our individual voter interviews and focus groups. And then next slide, please, Ashley. And quickly, what we discovered were two major themes, which was that one, party at the mailbox confirmed that it was a celebration of community, as well as we uncovered another theme as well of voters seeing the act of voting as a sense of duty to their community. And what that theme helped us uncover was essentially that that similar to previous research on the D term and the calculus of voting, we know that voters do feel a sense of duty to vote. However, little research has looked upon why voters have this sense of duty. And from our qualitative results, there is at least evidence to show that essentially what happened was that Party at the Mailbox helped aid in helping to strengthen community and I will go into the results a little bit more during the discussion, but essentially, yes, that we saw that voters saw that voting was an act of duty. And I will kick it back over to Ashley.
So we can go more into it.
Sorry, I was going
we want to be.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
So essentially we're just going to stop right here for the sake of time, but in just a quick wrap up of just our future engagement, we are going to look at other cities and potentially how we can retool the model a little bit. But yeah, we welcome all of your questions and your feedback.
Thank you. Our next presenters, thank you. Next presenter, Christina Slaughter. You are open to share your screen.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending the panel. I am Christine Slaughter, and I'm a postdoc at Princeton. I'm going to present some ongoing work that I have on the role of racial resilience in American politics. So just to start off, appeals to Black perseverance have been long held in politics. So here is John Lewis at a rally for then candidate Hillary Clinton, where he uses a certain phrase where he says, "We have made too much progress and we're not going back, we're going forward. That's why we would go to the polls in November and vote like we've never voted before." And this is important because here John Lewis is trying to appeal to voters in order to use past injustices as a motivation for future participation. Similarly, he evoked his life story as something that's important for how folks should conceptualize their desires to engage. So this is after a racially charged incident with the Tea Party in 2014. And again, he's saying, it's okay, I faced this before. And kind of what he's referring to are some of the acts that he's engaged in order to make voting rights accessible for African Americans within American politics. And kind of where my research comes in is considering how are appeals to Black perseverance really striking up African Americans' perceptions of the group's resilience. So what I'm going to do in the presentation is discuss what racial resilience is and how we should understand it, but also generally how resilience is evoked in Black participation. So kind of the broader research question is, how does the perception of racial resilience influence the frequency and substance of participation? So just generally thinking about the framing of why identity and consciousness is important for Black political behavior. Black Americans have a distinctive group cohesiveness that's important for how they interpret political events. And this is including their experiences of shared discrimination and also linked fate. And that is how African Americans rely on the group standing as a proxy for their individual well-being. We see throughout much of political science that linked fate and group consciousness are very important in terms of how folks come to understand politics and see their obligation to participate. I want to make sure this question in the chat isn't for me. Oh, okay. If I'm a little muffled, let me correct that. Thank you, Dr. Greer.
No, we can't hear you. We can't hear you at all. If you want, we can come back to you because we can't hear you. I see. Yeah, we can't.
Hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
AirPods, y'all know they be doing their own thing sometimes. So thank you everybody for your patience, but we're not gonna let that block. And I'm gonna reclaim those 2 minutes. So just wanna let y'all know that. Okay, so let's go back to where we were. Talking about, here we go. So again,
you were fine where you were.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. The main point to be drawn here is that racial group identification and racial group consciousness are important for interpreting and understanding African-American political behavior. And a part of the introduction that I like to make is a new way to think about racial group consciousness, and that is the extent to which African-Americans perceive themselves to be resilient. So why is this resilience important? Well, resilience is something that's been developed in adjacent literature such as psychology, sociology, and history. And basically it seeks to understand how individuals are successful despite high levels of stress and trauma that can be inflicted over the life course. So how do folks in the experiences of trauma adapt to remain well, recover, and even thrive in the face of adversity? And this isn't something that's static. This is something that's developed over time and can vary across and within individuals. And African Americans, as we know, have learned to overcome oppression and other obstacles and challenges because the culture encourages resilience. But within political science, we don't necessarily have a language to talk about resilience, nor do we have any understanding to how resilience is influential for political participation. So kind of my primary argument is that resilience is racial resilience is distinctive from an individual resilience. This is a salient form of racial group consciousness that's relevant for African Americans. It's not specific to politics, but we can observe it in politics, and is associated with different forms of political behavior, such as engagement in communal acts and higher stress acts for African Americans. So how do I measure resilience? I'm going to show you evidence from 2 studies, both of African Americans conducted within the past year, and just some sample characteristics. It's primarily registered voters, median income of around 25,000, and we have a good spread on both ideology and partisanship. So the racial resilience scale is an original scale that I developed, and I'm working to understand a lot of its political effects. So some of the questions for the racial resilience scale are both tapping into African Americans' awareness of systematic injustices, but also their orientation towards triumph. So this is the key feature of racial resilience is, one, again, their African Americans' orientation towards triumph and their awareness of past injustices. So you can see this in some of the items. So item 1, Black people have experienced generations of hardship, and folks are indicating on a degree to strongly disagree to strongly agree. And I take their total score and then I combine it to develop a racial resilience score. So these are the 8 items that I use to develop the scale. And if we think about how the scale relates to other measures within political science, one, we can see that's a relatively weak correlation with linked fate, but with some of the identity items, such as some of the measures that are used for group consciousness, we also see that it's distinct from group consciousness. And the strongest correlation is between the idea that identity is important. And it would be a surprise if we didn't see a measure that talks about cultural components of African Americans to not be related to the importance of racial identity. If we think about characterizing different African Americans as racially resilient or not, this is a result from a regression where I use the placement on the racial resilience scale as the outcome. And every item here is used as a predictor. So this is understanding what is contributing to higher or lower levels of racial resilience. So your coefficients on the right-hand side are going to be positive, and on the left-hand side, these are going to be negative. So some things that I want to point out is, again, we see that linked fate is positively associated with higher levels of racial resilience. However, it's not correlated with, which is what I showed you in the past slide. And again, we see those identity variables being influential for characterizing racially resilient African Americans. And then we see that individuals with a higher level of psychological resilience are also having higher levels of racial resilience. So again, what the psychological resilience measure is capturing is just an individual sense of overcoming adversities. But what the racial resilience measure is capturing is a collective sense of that Black Americans have overcome certain adversities, but the psychological resilience scale is developed within psychology and it's not engaging the same items. So thinking about how racial resilience may be important to politics, if we think about the terms that African Americans have had to engage in the political process, they've often come with some sort of cost. So the two images I have here are one, folks waiting in line to vote. And this was at the beginning of the pandemic when the state of Wisconsin decided to not move their primary election. And we saw folks waiting in lines up to 8 hours in order to participate. And this at the bottom is during the racial reckoning of 2020, where folks got out to participate and was met with state repression. And my argument is that in order to understand why and how folks engage in these acts, we have to take seriously the role of resilience. So that kind of leads to my expectations, is that we should see that racial resilience is associated with higher risk and higher costs on political engagement. The effects of racial resilience should be distinct from linked fate and psychological resilience. And we should see racial resilience is associated with a greater willingness to vote. So what I'm going to show you on the next slide, again, these are looking at 5 different higher cost participation acts. So the first is attending a protest, attending a community meeting, a town hall, a boycott, and then attending a rally. So this is similar to the types of things that we would see Black folks engaging in. And again, this is a regression. These are regression coefficients. So I'm just going to point out the racial resilience placement on each, and we can talk about the others if folks are interested. So we see, kind of contrary to my expectations, that racial resilience isn't the primary driver of engagement in these activities, other than for attending a boycott, but we see this isn't statistically significant different from 0. So there are some kind of ways to think about how measures such as income and age are also kind of impacting the extent to which we can see the expression of racial resilience in its relationship to these acts. So this is the first set of findings, is that it may be less connected to this higher risk participation than I expected, but we do see a consistent effect of linked fate and also income. So it may be some potential mediating effects that need to be examined. So second, I'm going to show some results in terms of electoral engagement. And this is where we kind of see the relation. Well, we do see the relationship that I expect in terms of waiting in line to vote. So what I did here was I asked respondents, they were randomized to see either a question where it says, are you willing to wait 30 minutes? Are you willing to wait 60 minutes? Are you willing to wait 120 minutes in order to vote? And in the 30-minute condition, we see that individuals that were higher in racial resilience are more willing to wait for the 30 minutes, but we do see this effect attenuate as we increase that time. So this is some preliminary, well, not preliminary, it's concrete evidence to show that racial resilience does impact intent to participate. However, we kind of need to clarify under what conditions we see this, this work. So in wrapping up, linked fate is dominant in the measure of racial group consciousness and its applicability to political behavior, but racial resilience provides an alternative measure and a way to think about collective adversity and its role in politics. And this is a recap of what we've discussed, that the racial resilience scale is an original scale. It's distinct from individual resilience, and it's likened to other forms of group consciousness. And it adds some context to political decision-making, but there are conditions that we need to explore. So I will stop there and thank you all for your time. And if you like this presentation, you should tweet about it. And that's my contact. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Brother Sharif and Brandon Armstrong, we're ready for you.
All right. All right. So our topic is finding independence in a party-filled room. For this project, we use Anthony Downs' definition of political parties, which is a team seeking to control the governing apparatus by gaining office in a duly constituted election. Under perfect conditions, which we classify as almost perfect information, parties behave rationally by meeting at the center of the distribution of public opinion while avoiding polarizing stances on salient issues. These parties undergo strategies that maximize their vote-seeking efforts to control the governing apparatus. However, gradual changes across time have led voters to form new coalitions and rekindle old alliances with political parties. All right, so some of the research also shows that Black voters also have followed this trend because of shifting issues, change in party ideology, and direction of party leadership. These shifts and changes across time from Reconstruction to Civil Rights era have shown the willingness of Black voters to gravitate to different political organizations and or parties because of these shared political interests.
So we explored three concepts within our research. The first concept is independent from political parties, which is defined to the extent which registered voters of the state of Florida exhibit the characteristic of not registering with political parties or switching from political parties. The next concept is not registering with political parties, no party affiliate, which is defined as the extent to which registered voters in the state of Florida exhibit the characteristic of not affiliating with any political party on record. And the last concept is voter interest, which is defined as the extent to which eligible voters exhibit the characteristic of being idle or reacting to voter outcomes, party leadership, or policy positions.
All right, keeping those concepts in mind, when we're looking at the research question, we ask, have voters become independent of political parties in the state of Florida? And if so, are there significant differences across registered voters when we're considering political party choice and race?
So throughout this research, we have a couple of assumptions and conditions. The first one is voters are rational actors who seek to maximize their political interests. As an effort to achieve this goal, these voters align with the political party to gain control of the governing apparatus. We expect that when voters' interests are met by a political party, voters will remain in that political space. However, when voter interests are not met by a political party, voters will remove themselves and search for another political space.
To our methods section, in our sample, we have 99 observations, and it's from 2000 to 2020. Our analysis excludes 9 observations, and that's because Hispanic wasn't recorded as a race in the state division of elections when they was recording race of registered voters from 2000 to 2006. Of course, the subject of interest, registered voters in the state of Florida, and the variables we're looking at: year, political party choice, number of registered voters, and race. Techniques used in this particular study: plots, ANOVA, and 2 key tests.
All right, so the first plot we have here is showing that registered Black voters increasingly grew from 2000 through 2022. The largest increase of Black voters occurred from 2006 to 2008, with the second largest increase in Black registered voters taking place from 2002 through 2004. However, we have 2 declines. The first decline is in 2010, and the second decline is in 2014.
All right, so Black Republicans in Florida. Something interesting that you'll see here on this particular graph, we see a sharp incline from 2000 to 2006. However, you see a drastic decline right here from 2006 to 2010 there. 2006 to 2010, yes. And then also we see another decline from 2012 and 2014 with a slight increases. We see an increase from 2014 to 2020. Also right here, obviously after 2014, again, we see it continue to go up, and one slight increase from 2010 to 2012. You can see that there.
When it comes to Blacks registering for no party affiliation, we see that it increased overall from 2000 through 2020, with the largest increases occurring in 3 periods from 2002 to 2004, 2010 through 2012, and from 2014 through 2018.
All right, white Democrats registered in the state of Florida. As you can see here, there's a steady increase from 2000 to 2004. But there was a radical decline, if you can see that here on this graph, from 2008 to 2014. If you can imagine what was going on in 2008 and 2014 what occurred, but we'll talk about that later. And then also we see an increase slightly in 2006 from 2008, what led up to that. We have some speculation assumptions of what led up to that. And then we see, again, it picks back up in 2018 to 2020, from 2018 to 2020.
All right, for whites who registered for the Republican Party, we see the large growth in registered voters from 2000 through 2022 as well. We see 2 drops. The first drop occurred from 2008 through 2010. The second drop occurred from 2012 through 2014. And then we see exponential growth in registered white Republicans from 2014 through 2016. And it continued to rise post 2016.
All right, so we get to white registered voters in the state of Florida when it comes to no party affiliation, not aligning or affiliated with any party, but has a designation of NPA, which is non-party affiliation. We see a steady increase from 2000 to 2018, as you can see it there. But with the highest increases from 2002 to 2004, and 2010 to 2012, and 2016 to 2018. However, right here, what you'll notice, especially when compared to other races that we'll talk about later, it tapers off right there from 2018 to 2020.
And for Hispanics who register for the Democratic Party, we see that it's generally it increases from 2006 through 2020, with the largest increase occurring in 2 areas, which is 2006 through 2008, and from 2014 through 2016.
All right, Hispanic Republicans in the state of Florida. So we see it's largely is an increase from Hispanic voters from 2006 to 2020. But the most significant initial drop we see is from 2012 to 2014, right here. It was a little drop here from 2008 to 2010. However, steady incline from 2014 on up.
All right. When it comes to Hispanics registered for no party affiliation, we see it increases over time from 2006 through 2020, and with the largest increases occurring in 2 areas again, from 2010 through 2012, and from 2014 through 2018.
All right, doing the Tukey test, we see here's the distribution of registered voters by race and party affiliation, and we have the box plot here.
All right, and we see that whites remain with the largest distribution across all party registrations: Democrat, no party affiliation, and Republican. However, Black registered voters led second with the largest distribution when it came to the Democratic Party. However, they fell third behind Hispanics for no party affiliation and Republican Party. Here's a mean plot for the political party choice and the number of registered voters. And we also have the confidence intervals. As you can see, our sample sizes for each party is 30. The sample size is 30 because it excludes 9 observations, 3 from each, for Hispanics not being recorded as a race in the state of Florida from 2000 through 2006.
All right, using the Tukey test again, we discovered that there's no significant difference between groups Republican and Democrat and between Republican and no party affiliation.
All right, so here we have another mini plot, but we have it for race this time and the number of registered voters. And it also includes the confidence intervals. As you can see, the sample size is at the bottom. We have 33 for Blacks, 33 for whites. However, we have 24 for Hispanics to account for the observations missing for Hispanics not being recorded from 2000 through 2006.
All right, looking at using the two key tests again, we also see in the top left-hand corner, we also see there's no significant difference between groups of Hispanics and Blacks here. And in our findings, what we notice is that there's increase amongst eligible voters registering with the non-party affiliate. And as Dr. Armstrong mentioned before, this designation itself here, it just speaks to those individuals who are choosing not to affiliate with any party at all, which is slightly different if we look at other states that use the independent category or being labeled or designated with the independent designation. In the state of Florida, no party affiliation is considered that individual who do not associate or affiliate with any party. The rise and trend of no party affiliation is seen across racial lines, as you can see in the graphs that we showed before. As the two major main parties in Florida continue to veer off from the center, we see that more eligible voters are either not registering with political parties or switching from parties. It can be posited that these changes are being made by eligible voters who are more aligned themselves near the center. These eligible voters are moderate that lean towards conservative or liberal ideologies based on issue politics.
And some things that this newfound independence from political parties in Florida shows voters' willingness to change. They're changing when they are met with either shifting of issues, party ideology changes, and changes in the direction of party leadership. We also saw differences as well, as we showed in the results. So while exploring the differences among political party choice, we found that there's a significant difference between groups who identify as no party affiliation and the Democratic Party. And among racial groups, there were significant differences between whites and Blacks and whites and Hispanics.
And that concludes our presentation. Obviously, you can ask questions once we get to the last, after everybody's presented.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And our last presentation from Donovan Watts.
Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. One second. All right, here we go. So thank you all just for coming out today. So my name is Donovan Watts. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Political Science at Indiana University. And today I'll be presenting my research entitled Black Millennials, Slipping Alliances, and the Democratic Party. So this project is a part of my larger dissertation project. So it's one of my empirical chapters. So I'm definitely looking forward to all the comments, the feedback, and suggestions that I get from you all. Now, what I want to do is take us back to 2008. So in 2008, President Obama, during his campaign, he did something that was very unique at the time for a presidential candidate, and he targeted young voters. And during this process, by targeting young voters, that helped propel him to his electoral victory. And for the first time in 2008, we saw Black voters. Voting turnout was higher than white voter turnout. And the group that helped spearhead this among Black voters was Black millennials. Now, the Democratic Party figured that they had a new group of voters to be able to rely on, but that was not necessarily the case. So in 2012 and 2014 data, what it shows is that after the 2008 election, support for Obama began to increase or began to decrease. Now, the support remained high among Black voters at large, but it took a noticeable dip among Black millennials. Now, for Black millennials will soon represent the largest voting bloc among Black voters. And we have yet to see whether there are any intra-group differences with respect to party identification. And that's what my project is about. So one of my arguments today is that I'll argue that Black millennials will not be as tied to the Democratic Party as compared to Black non-millennials. And then I'll also argue that the Democratic Party will have to earn Black millennials' right to vote as well. So it won't be as cut and dry as we've come to know it. And this leads me to my research question. Do Black millennials have the same party loyalties to the Democratic Party as compared to Black non-millennials? Now, a quick clarifying thing that I want to just point out to you all. So when I refer to Black non-millennials, that'll be individuals or Black voters who are part of the baby boomer and the Gen X generation. I'll speak more on that when I get to my data, but just a quick clarifying point. Now, as we think about party loyalty with respect to the Democratic Party, one of the things that I wanted to do was just take us back to the origins of where Black party loyalty began. So the first place that we can go to is during the Reconstruction era. And during the Reconstruction era, the Republican Party was the party that supported Black enfranchisement, and they fought for Black interests. So this was the era that we began to see the seeds of Black party loyalty being shown. So at its apex, Black voting turnout remained high during Reconstruction, and much of their loyalty was for the Republican Party. Now, during the period of the 1920s and the 1940s, when both parties, so the Democratic Party and the Republican Party's position were indistinguishable on civil rights, we also saw a split on Black party loyalty as well. Now, with the FDR New Deal policies and this progressive economic policies as well that help support Black individuals, that's when we started to see a gradual shift for Black voters to the Democratic Party. Also, the New Deal, or I'm sorry, also the Warren Court positions and Warren Court's decisions on civil rights issues that also helped begin to start the process of shifting Black party loyalty to the Democratic Party. And with the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, that solidified the party realignment for African Americans. And ever since, Black voters have been strong supporters of the Democratic Party. Now, after understanding party loyalty, the origins of party loyalty, I want to speak on party loyalty with respect to the Democratic Party. Now, since the 1964 presidential election, the Democratic Party became known as the party of racial liberalism, while the Republican Party became the party of racial conservatism. And the key thing on this is that changes in parties' position on racial policy issues typically best describes the partisanship of Black voters. Now, although that Democratic Party loyalty is strong, research shows that it's not as cut and dry as we like to think. So work from White and colleagues, what they show in their 2014 work, they find that Black Americans deal with this. They generate this idea called a racialized social pressure, and this constrains and depresses individual self-interest. And in their follow-up work and steadfast Democrats, what they show is that loyalty is so strong that African Americans are willing to change their individual interests to conform to group interests. Now, studies also show that this crosses ideological lines as well. And studies show that Black voters who are ideologically conservative still vote for the Democratic Party at high rates. Now, what I want to do is just shift our focus on just gauging this idea of Democratic Party enthusiasm. And the first thing that I'll do is I'll touch on Tashfeld and Turner's social identity theory. And what this theory does is that it explains that a psychological connection to a group of people predicts how social attachment can generate either a positive or a negative emotion. Now, we have seen political scientists use the social identity theory to show how it influences partisan attachment. And one of the works that I would like to highlight is individuals who are strongly attached to a partisan identity and experience a party victory will have a large sense of enthusiasm due to their attachment to the party, while a party loss generates a negative response. And one thing that I want to focus on is that we began to see how this affects African American voters. We saw it in the 1984 and 1988 presidential election with Jesse Jackson. We saw it in the 1992 presidential election with Bill Clinton. And then we also saw it in the 2008 presidential election as well. So just this idea of Democratic Party enthusiasm and the impact that Black voters' enthusiasm can have for a candidate. Now, what I'll do is I'll begin to talk about the Millennial Generation. So millennials are the most educated and diverse generation, and have overtaken baby boomers as the largest living adult generation. Further, the Millennial Generation typically leans more liberal than non-millennials. and vote for the Democratic Party at higher rates. Now, as we begin to break down the groups within the Millennial Generation, Black millennials support the Democratic Party and President Obama at higher rates compared to other millennials. And Black millennials also have distinct viewpoints on policy issues when we compare them to white millennials and Latino millennials as well. Now, after discussing that, I just want to acknowledge my hypothesis. So my first hypothesis is that Black millennials will not be as enthusiastic about the Democratic Party when compared to Black non-millennials. Second is voter turnout for the Democratic Party will fluctuate for Black millennials until they have a candidate or a cause that they believe in. Next, similar to Black non-millennials, my argument is that Black millennials will not shift their party loyalties to the Republican Party or another third party. And lastly, Black millennials will be more liberal in ideological views when compared to Black non-millennials. Now, I want to discuss the data that I'll go over today. So it'll be the 2016, 2018, and 2020 CCES. But for purposes of time, I'll only focus on the 2016 CCES today. And one of the huge benefits about the 2016, 2018, and 2020 CCES is that they have a large sample size of Black respondents, but also a large sample size of Black millennial respondents as well. So that's key for my work. So for the 2016 CCES, there's 2,683 Black millennial respondents and 4,924 Black non-millennial respondents. Important to note when I show you all my models and also graphs as well, I subset for all Black respondents. So everything that we'll be looking at today will only be Black respondents. Now for my dependent variables, the first dependent variable that I have is a proxy to measure democratic enthusiasm. And this question asks, do you approve of the way Obama is doing his job? This is on a 4-point scale with 1 strongly disapprove as the lowest score and then 4 strongly approve as the highest score. And what I do is I standardize the variables. So each value is standardized between the number 0 and 1. Now the second, my second dependent variable, do you intend to vote in the for the purposes of today, do you intend to vote in the 2016 presidential election? No being the lowest outcome and yes being the highest. So no is gonna be categorized as 0 and then yes is gonna be categorized as 1 and everything else in between. And then I also use the party identification scales and also the ideology scale as well. And for my independent variables, age is going to be my primary independent variable, and then I also control for education, family, income, gender. And this question asks, basically, are you angry that racism exists? Now, the first thing that we'll look at is just a distribution of party identification amongst Black millennials and Black non-millennials. And I'll walk us through this. And basically what we see in the first graph, this is just showing Black millennials, is that when it comes to party identification, as I said earlier, 0 is going to be individuals who are very strong Republicans, and 1 is going to be coded for individuals as strong strong Democrats or very strong Democrats. And what we see is that for Black millennials, for what we see for Black millennials is that Black millennials are overwhelmingly still support still strong Democrats, but we also see that for Black millennials, they're kind of leaners as well. We see more leaning Black millennial Democrats for this group. And then when we compare to Black non-millennials, I noticed that for Black non-millennials, there's a lot more very strong Democrats for the Black non-millennials and a lot less lean Democrats for Black non-millennials as well. Now, with respect to ideology for both Black millennials and Black non-millennials, not much of a difference. We see that for the value of 0, this is going to be conservative, and then for the value of 1, this is going to be liberal. And what we see is that for both groups, for millennials, they're overwhelmingly a part of they identify as moderates for Black millennials, and for Black non-millennials, also overwhelmingly identify as moderates as well. What I did notice is that there are a bit more Black millennials who are under the liberal category, but not too much. So I just categorized all of them as moderates. And just going to my first regression table. like I said, what I'll do is I'll focus on the millennial variable just for today, and we can also talk about everything else in the Q&A if anyone so pleases. But what we see, the first regression model asks respondents, do you intend to vote in the 2016 election? And what we see for millennials, millennials are, in comparison to Black non-millennials, Black millennials are less likely to vote in the 2016 election. And for the approval of Obama, for Black millennials in comparison to Black non-millennials, Black millennials are less likely to approve of Obama as well. Now, in conclusion, just want to say my results in words. So Black millennials were less likely to vote in the 2016 presidential election. This is consistent with our first hypothesis. Black millennials were less likely to approve of Obama in 2008. This is also supports my first hypothesis as well. And just as I just give you all an idea of what the next steps is for me, what I'll do is I'll work on expanding my project by conducting focus groups in Bloomington, Indiana, Indianapolis, Indiana, and also the Metro Detroit area as well. And with that being said, I just want to say thank you all, and look forward to your questions and answers, or to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'll move through some items that I jotted down quickly, and hopefully, or we'll see if someone from the audience has any questions for the panelists. So for the first paper, I have a couple of thoughts or areas. And so one is, was civic education part of the box? Or was it just, was it specific to the races that were on the ballot for that cycle, or, generally speaking? And then is there a consideration for a longitudinal study to see if those individuals that received a box, will they continue in the next election cycle? Let's say if they did not get a box, right? So if they got it the first time and not the second time, was there any difference in participation? And then I'm sure you have it. How did the people get the Google form in order to get, to complete, to determine who got the box? So that was for the first paper. The second paper, I'm curious, since you noted that racial resiliency was not necessarily a motivational factor, I'm curious because we have discussions about that issue. So I'm curious as to, like, if we have that assumption of racial resiliency as a motivating factor, and based on the study results that you have, that was not necessarily the motivating factor. I'm curious as to what should we now start changing our language about racial resiliency when it comes to civic engagement and participation in policy. For the third paper, for Brother Sharif and Armstrong, I was curious about whether or not you controlled for population growth when you had your models. I'm sure you get that question all the time. So I was curious about, did you control for population growth? And as you measure, did you have any thoughts about what it means for the future of political parties, particularly comparing, and I know y'all are focused on Florida, especially for states that have closed primary states. Is there something that we can take from this with regard to how political parties continue to function, particularly if political parties appear to stay on the extremes of their spectrum? And as you note, since there's a rise in independent voters? Is anyone moving to the center to grab those center folks if they're not going with the one of the major two parties? Or even if there's a rise of independent party candidates in an independent party, especially in a closed primary state. And then for the last paper, I'm curious if, and I think you got it to the answer. I probably wrote my question before you got to your conclusion. A correlation between electoral participation of millennials post Obama 2008, and then like the why behind it. So what specifically was the group that you are researching, the millennials, like what was it that they were disappointed in the Obama presidency? And to, I guess a part B to that is, was the disappointment about what the powers of the presidency is or are versus what they wanted to happen, even if what was wanted was not actually in the purview of the president? Does it make sense what I just said?
Yes, it does. It does.
Okay, great. So that's the feedback that I have. I think this is great. These are great papers. These are amazing papers. So I'm wondering, is there any items from the audience? If not, any burning questions? No? Okay. Well, we're at the time, and I wish we had more time because civic engagement. Oh, Dr. Jabril, your hand is raised.
Just quickly, I thought they were great papers. I thought that they were interesting and insightful. I also thought that your questions that you posed there were important questions as well, and I looked to their responses, and so that was it. Really, I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jabril. So I don't know if anyone, I don't want to impose on anyone's schedule. And I didn't know if anyone had the space, quickly to respond to anything or make any clarifications. I just wanted to stay true to time and not impose on anyone's schedule. No? Yeah?
Not just quickly, I just want to give a shout out to Dr. Jabril. That's one of my mentors as well, from Clark Atlanta University. Clark Atlanta University. I'm gonna give you a shout out, Doc. Looking good, man. You're looking young. But just quickly, just in response to the population growth. So Florida it's just a steady, continuous growth over time, and actually, we had a slight increase, last year, 2019, 2020. Not last year, 2 years ago. But however, it's just a steady, continuing increase. It wasn't no mass influx of individuals coming to kind of alter. We did notice, we did get a lot of individuals coming from the island of Puerto Rico. So that may speak a little bit. It did increase amongst Latino voters, but that still fell in line with the gradual increase that we were seeing there. So it just speaks to that as well. So, and like you mentioned, Florida is a closed primary state. So it puts them in an interesting conundrum as far as those individuals who identify as non-party affiliate, or for speaking terms, we'll say independent voter. But just to be clear about that, in Florida, we do have an independent registration. So you can be designated as an independent, but that's actually a party in Florida. So, and a non-party affiliate is an individual, that's who they want to talk about when they talk about independent people who are independent voters in Florida. They're talking about the non-party affiliate. They just keep crossing the terminology because they're not aware of it. A lot of, especially in the media, what have you, they keep saying independent voters. They really want to say non-party affiliates, because that's the next. So it's Democratic Party, Republican, and then non-party affiliates are the top three designations to have in Florida, with the non-party affiliate rising in overtaking in some of, if we look at the Latino population and also amongst Blacks as well. And this is where we're talking about we're finding independence in a party-filled room. And that's what our title of the paper was. All right, just want to stop there.
Yeah, no, it's great. Anyone else?
I'm happy to try to answer a couple of the questions. So just quickly about the longitudinal studies, if we were considering any, we have considered it, particularly for Baltimore, but the data that we received, like the voter history data, was from 2 different sources across those elections. And so there weren't unique identifiers readily available to do that quickly. So it's in the future, but it'll just take us a little bit longer to sort of make sure that the quality of those matches across time makes sense. But it's in the back of our minds, and I think it's a really important thing. So thanks for bringing it up again and reminding us that we should continue working on that. We checked sort of for overlap between those 2 elections. Really roughly, we need to do it a bit more systematically, but we didn't find many people who participated twice. I don't want to say too much about that because, like I said, we need to sort of formalize the process moving forward. And about the Google form, how did they get there? Black Girls Vote is really, really embedded in the community in Baltimore, and they did such an amazing job of getting the word out on the radio and TV and social media. So that's how folks were sort of recruited. They went to their website after they heard about it, and they signed up through a Google form there. And that's why we think it's so important to sort of separate our analysis between hosts, so those people who signed up who were already sort of tuned in and plugged into politics, and guests who live with them. And when we ran an analysis about voter propensity over time, we found that those guests were more likely to, or they were less likely to turn out to vote in general compared to the people that signed up for boxes. So that's sort of why we have it separated. We don't have the results yet for Richmond, Virginia, but we did another study there, and this was one where people didn't necessarily sign up. Yeah, the whole thing, I'm not going to go into it, it was different. So hopefully we can figure out a little bit more about the project without having that sort of plugged in component there, but hopefully we can let you know. Thanks for your questions.
Well, thank you. All right, anyone else? All right, well, again, I appreciate you all very much. Thank you all for your attention and your papers and all the value you are adding to electoral participation. So enjoy the rest of the conference. Take care.
Take care.
You too, thank you.
Thank you.